So, what's your name?
My name is Natalie Hayes.
My name is Zach.
How do you feel about most video games that are generally marketed to men or marketed to the hyper masculine and heteronormative standards?
How do I feel about it? All right, that's there's a lot of things to unpack there. Um, uh, Let me kind of break it down. Hyper masculine, I think that still a problem, somewhat become less of a problem over the past couple of years, but still definitely a problem in gaming because it's all most games are challenge based, but they're inherently violent based, and I feel like that limits game design. And I think part of that is due to the hypermasculine standard. And as far as heteronormative, I mean, take a look at Cyberpunk 2077 and the freak out online that came when they said gender's going to be a slide on this. There's a real toxic and problematic culture within gaming that says this is what a gamer is and no one else can be that. And it's exclusionary and it sucks. I like the diversity that games can bring when you bring in new types of players that bring new types of experience. One of my favorite game series is Kingdom Hearts, and that's kind of famous for having a huge female uh, audience within it. And I think that it's due in part, not totally, but in part to the way the protagonist acts and the fact that he's not a hyper masculine goofball. He's kind of lovable, more shonen-y protagonist, just a nice guy. And I think that video games could do better with having more variety in that. Or what's the name of that? The farming game. Uh, I can't
Stardew?
think of the name. Yes, Stardew Valley. Thank you very much. Stardew Valley is another example of a great game that's based around challenges, not really violence, and not hyper masculine, and it brings in a wider crowd because of it. Or Minecraft or Mario, all these variety of experiences that I think are inherently valuable. I'm not going to say I've necessarily played some of them. Stardew Valley, appreciate that they're in the space because it opens up new things.
So, the answer I would have given you in college when I graduated is going to be vastly different from the answer that I give you now. Just because I'm in marketing, so let me sort of unpack that, right? So the answer I would have given you when I graduated college was, I find it very upsetting, and it's gross, and it's awful, and it's terrible, right? But like, not to say that it isn't still, it is, but right, I know that the split, at least like the marketing split for video games, is going to be slightly leaning towards men than it is women. So if you are, say, your general marketer and you're trying to market a video game, say, right, like, I'm just trying to think of something that happens year over year, say like WWE or some wrestling game, right? Like, your audience is going to be masculine. That being said, right, your marketing demographic is going to be, let's say, a man between 24 to 31, right, who is going to be straight, right? If you're playing a WWE game, just kind of a given in this situation, then yeah, your marketing is going to be more hypermasculine and more heteronormative, right? But it's hard to say that the industry as a whole leans that way. Majoritively, yes, but I think that's less of a problem on the development company and on the marketing team, and more towards, right, like, the community as a whole. I think that problem sort of lies in, women have been told, right, that video games are more for men. They aren't necessarily for them, especially in upbringing. When you look at young boys and young boys are sort of encouraged to play video games, while young girls are sort of encouraged to take on, like, more arts and crafts and sort of these more feminine hobbies. So then, as these marketing demographics grow older, it just sort of makes sense that the marketing demographic for video games is going to be more male leaning than it is female leaning. And at that point, right, like, if I were in a marketing company's shoes and I'm in an industry that is male dominated, you're going to market to men I mean, even though that might not be necessarily what you're about, and obviously you want to market towards women, unfortunately, right? Like your money is coming from the pocket of those men, and you need to take it from them. I know that's kind of cutthroat to say it that way, but as a marketer in the tech industry, that's what you would do.
Which video game do you believe over sexualizes women or does a bad job representing women?
Ooh, so I almost hate myself for saying this, but I say it knowing sort of the development and the minds behind it. But games like Bayonetta, right? I love Bayonetta. I love her as a character. I think she is super interesting. However, she was made by a man, right, who wanted this hypersexualized female character whose clothes are created essentially like by her hair, right? And she's a witch. And while she is super badass, and I think she is really cool, and I love her character design, and the game is really fun, she is over sexualized. Like, I wish I could even say, right, that that was sort of the point of her character. But when she is created by a man and she is sort of his sexual fantasy, that is sexist. That is always going to be sexist, even if you say, right, that she's playing up against the norms. I don't care who you are. That's gross. That's sexism, right? And even though I might even like it to a certain like guilty pleasure perspective, it's a problem. Even though it was again, right, like super successful, but again, she is this over sexualized, like, pardon my French, but like out sort of woman. You know, while I love her as a character design, it would be totally different if we were talking about someone who is gender fluid or, you know, identifies themselves as female or feminine, right? Having written this character to explore femininity. But the fact that it is a man who is heterosexual, identifies as a man, who was like, yeah, I'm going to write this female character and she's going to be cool. Like, there's a way to write an empowering female character, and a woman whose clothes are made out of her own hair and she has like triple D cups, right? That ain't it. Like, I'm sorry. She's just not it. Again, I love her. It's a controversial, character to pick. It's a controversial game to pick, but for me, it's going to be a game like Bayonetta.
Do you have a favorite female game developer that you're aware of? And if not, why do you think that is?
Um, I do not. Part of the reason I think that's so is there's this problem in the games industry where it's an inherently toxic culture. It's if you make it 5 years, you're considered a veteran developer because they have you pulling such long hours, and there's this real culture problem of it's a man's club, and at least as far as outsider looking in. I can't say I haven't worked in the industry, but I've just read about it and heard other people talking about it, and it's a real man's culture. 80-hour weeks are the expected, 7 days a week, crunch is apparent, and so a lot of game developers don't really stick around for the long haul. Heck, even some of the famous ones like Cliff Bleszinski give up development after a while and say, hey, we're not making games anymore. So inherently there's a problem where there's not a lot of developers. And like I said, the inherent sexism means there's also not, like, in that small pool, females are also cropped out, unfortunately.
I really, and I've always liked this developer. I've liked her for a long time, but I really like Karen Weeks. Karen Weeks worked at BioWare. I'm actually not, I don't think she works there anymore. I think she recently moved on, but she worked at BioWare with her husband, Patrick Weeks, and they both did extensive work on all the Dragon Age games, and she was a creative. She was a writer on their team. I always felt like that team, but also Karen in particular, did a really good job at writing characters and writing dialogue that spoke to, again, like, something that's important to me, which is human connection, but also a little bit of humor. She did a lot of great work. She's also really nice in person. I did meet her at a convention one time. But her character design, her character dialogue, always made me laugh, right? That's something that I've always really liked about her. But a studio that is actually female led that I really like is Nyx Hydra, which is actually a mobile game developer, at least as far as I'm aware. And they actually wrote this game called The Arcana that I'm currently obsessed with. Like, my fiance could tell you more about it. Like, I'm obsessed with it. But it kind of plays into like that visual novel aspect of sort of almost sort of this guilty pleasure. I feel like visual novels are sort of a guilty pleasure thing for a lot of women, but this very like mythical, magical storyline, but it's very inclusive, both masculine, feminine, and gender neutral pronouns. You can pick any character that you want to talk to in romance, regardless if they're male or female. Nothing is gated, right? Like, it's a lot of fun. um, I think that they've done a really good job with their team, especially for a mobile game, because I feel like the mobile games industry is a whole different animal. But Karen Weeks and Nyx Hydra are sort of my favorites that I like to talk about.